My name is Reena Pande. I'm a physician, entrepreneur, healthcare executive. My most recent chapter was as Chief Medical Officer at Able2, which many of you may know is a virtual, I guess one of the earliest virtual mental health organizations. We were acquired by Optum back in 2020. That was chapter 2. Chapter 1 of my career was as an academic physician, actually cardiologist by training. And I was a practicing cardiologist and a clinical researcher at Brigham and Women's Hospital here in Boston. This is chapter 3 of my career, which is still unfolding, and these ladies who are with me are watching it and helping it unfold. What is clear to me is that a large segment of it will have to be dedicated to pointing my experience, expertise, and wisdom back towards the rest of you to help develop the next wave of clinician leaders who really will be responsible for driving innovation, clinical innovation in healthcare technology from here forward. And that is coming together in webinars like these, where we can highlight the great work of folks driving innovation forward, and in other ways. So stay tuned for up and coming events that I have planned to help clinician leaders develop into the executives they need to be really be part of the business community these days. As many of you know, too often there's a big chasm, right, between clinical disciplines and business disciplines. But when we find that alignment, it is like magic. It's really at that intersection of clinical and business capabilities that I think we can really unleash the power to drive clinical innovation in the next era, drive business outcomes, and really change the healthcare system, which is what all of us are looking to do. Sometimes clinical and business happen in the same human, and that is exactly what we see in the 3 ladies who are joining me for this conversation. So today I have the honor of moderating this discussion with 3 fabulous, as it happens, women clinician CEOs of early stage venture-backed companies. They have all 3 demonstrated the ability to hold in one place clinical capabilities and business needs for their organizations. So it is my pleasure to have the 3 of you with me today. Doing this work is not without its challenges, so I think this is going to be a really fun conversation. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves properly, but just by name. Jess Gaulton, who's the CEO of FamilyWell Health, Nicki Tessler, who is the CEO of BeMe Health, and Rachel McCrickard, who is the CEO of Motivo Health. And let's jump in. Well, actually, before we jump in, some nuts and bolts for our attendees. We're going to chat, have a deep discussion on some, I hope, hard topics that we'll unearth, some of the goods and some of the not goods. And then we'll leave the last 15 minutes for Q&A. And so those of you who have questions as we go through, please put them in the Q&A section. I see someone has already added something there. So please put your questions there, and that'll be a place we'll pull from at the tail end of the conversation. We'll be here together up to the top of the next hour. So sit tight and enjoy the conversation. Ladies, okay, let's jump in. So on melding clinical and business, which is not easy, but invaluable. I think a lot of folks think that clinicians can't be business leaders. Business leaders can't be clinicians. Sometimes that's true, that clinicians don't do it well, but not in your case. Here we have 3 outstanding people who are doing just that. So tell us a bit about your stories. I'll let you each tell your own stories, what your roles are about your company, how you got here. And what do you say to the naysayers who think you can't do both? Nicki, maybe we'll start with you, and then I'm just picking, maybe Rachel and then Jess.
That sounds great. Reena, I'm so excited to be here. Jess and Rachel, no one I'd rather be doing this conversation with. So thank you for having us. So a little bit about my background. A lot of people say they find mental health. I would tell you mental health found me. It's been my lifelong love. And so trained as a psychologist and a psychoanalytic one at that. Fun fact, I can probably score a Rorschach better than anybody. And as I started to climb the ranks in hospitals, what it came clear to me was that administration was missing a clinician perspective. And so I leaned more and more into that, really wanting to, drive what's best for a patient. Maybe it wasn't one-on-one now. Now we started to look at the broader reach of what a clinician could be and do in the healthcare settings. And then I moved on to managing large books of behavioral health business, so several hospitals, and really found that innovation was the key unlock to helping mental health finally be on even footing with the other service lines. And that couldn't have been more exciting for me. And so I jumped in the deep end 3 years ago at BeMe Health to build and set a new direction for teen mental health. I found that here we were looking at an industry with so many legacy pain points that adults found archaic. And so you look at these teens with digital dominant realities, and it just wasn't resonating. And yes, to boot, I have 2 teenage daughters. And so as a mom, I felt like that modeling of go after it, work boldly was critical in this stage in my life. So with that, I'm happy to, turn it over to Rachel to hear her story.
Awesome. Thanks, Nikki. I am so privileged to be here as well. These are some of my favorite women in the world. So thrilled to be here. Rachel McCrickard, CEO and co-founder of Motivo. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I started Motivo to solve a problem that I experienced on my own road to licensure, which was lack of access to a clinical supervisor. Many of you, I'm sure, on the call know about the process of clinical supervision that all therapists go through after grad school. When I was working towards my hours, I was in a rural area of North Georgia, and supervision had to be face-to-face, and the closest supervisor was 2 hours away in Atlanta. So I was driving back and forth to get to my supervisor's office each week, paid a lot of money out of pocket for supervision. I stuck with it, got licensed, but then I noticed that states started changing rules to allow virtual supervision. Georgia changed theirs in 2016, and then other states began following suit, and with the rise of the pandemic, even more states. So Motivo is a platform that connects new therapists with a clinical supervisor. And what I would say about this kind of melding of clinical and business disciplines, I'm thinking about like this podcast I listened to once, or this recording of Paul Graham, who was the maybe executive director at the time of Y Combinator, one of the largest accelerator programs for startups. Airbnb came out of Y Combinator, a lot of successful startups. And he was talking to a group of Stanford students, and they were saying, like, what can I do to like come up with my big idea? Like, I want to be an entrepreneur, like, help me think of an idea. And he said, you're approaching this the wrong way. Go learn a trade and then find out what problems exist in that industry. And so I feel like myself, and I actually think for Nicki and Jess, this is pretty true too, experiencing the problem yourself, like, oftentimes gives you what you need to come up with your idea. And so to the naysayers, I would say, it's not just that clinicians are good enough to start companies, that we're like the best people to be starting companies, because I don't think anybody from outside of our industry would have solved the clinical supervision problem. Because most people I talk to in the world, they don't even know what clinical supervision is. So we have a unique vantage point, I think, on the problems that exist in our industry, and then coming up with solutions. The business stuff you can learn. It's hard, but you can learn it. So that's what I would say about it, and I'll pass it over to Jess.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I feel similarly privileged and honored to be here, and just so inspired by this group of women. And so I completely agree with what Rachel just said. I just want to sort of extend what she said and validate that I completely agree. I think that going through the experience, really understanding the space, and then coming up with an idea to truly solve a problem is the way to go. And I got the same advice. I think for me, I'm a neonatologist. I'm a practicing physician. I work in the NICU with families and babies. And I always felt I think when I was born, that I always loved to put things together that didn't always fit. And I think that sort of exemplifies me as a person, because I'm half Taiwanese and half white, and grew up as an international journalist's daughter living around the world. I never felt like I quite fit, but I always found creative ways to put things together. And so I think being an entrepreneur sort of is in my blood, in a sense. And I'll just give you an example of the earliest entrepreneurial endeavor that I got myself involved in. I created a library in our basement in elementary school, and I alphabetized. It also shows how type A I am. Alphabetized every single book in our house, and labeled every single book, and then charged my parents to check out a book. And so it's just an
brilliant.
example of like little things that I've done along the way, and had no idea I was an entrepreneur, but started organizations along the way and got to know startups along the way. And so sort of melding that with my clinical interests, I became a pediatrician, board certified pediatrician, and then neonatologist. And during that process, I had 2 babies, 18 months apart, and experienced postpartum depression. And really struggled to recognize that I was having difficulty. Providers like myself, frontline medical providers, we don't get any training in mental health conditions in new parents and new moms. And so I didn't recognize my own symptoms. When I finally did, I really struggled to get help and got very frustrated with the healthcare system. And everything I tried to do within the healthcare system got shut down. And so, at a certain point, I said, after I overcame my own struggles, I said, you know what? I want to use this sort of the creative part of my brain, the entrepreneurial part of my brain that I didn't really know existed until now, and meld that with the problem that I see that I personally experienced and that so many moms in our country experience, and try to solve the problem from a different lens. And so what FamilyWell does is we integrate perinatal mental health services, a wraparound program within obstetric clinics, so OB clinics, so that the mental health services that are really, really hard to access are just baked into your OB experience right there in the clinic. And so that's what we do.
Thank you, three. You're actually getting into my next top question, where I wanted to lead, Jess, by your comments, all 3 of your comments, which is, what are the qualities? Like, what are the characteristics that make, I'll just say, someone a great entrepreneur, a great executive, right? I think we generalize clinicians can't be entrepreneurs, but what you just described is there are characteristics, right, that you held. I mean, I'm going to keep that story about you starting a library and charging your parents to get books, like, in my brain.
A library. I guess it's more like a bookstore. Because I charge.
Yeah, exactly. You have late fees and all that. That would be quite impressive.
Yep, I do have late fees, yep.
But what are those characteristics? There's probably people in the audience who are thinking, thinking about what they want to do with their career, right? Maybe think about making a leap. There's probably people who are listening in who have made that leap and are trying to be successful, and wondering what those characteristics are. So any of you, please share, like, what do you think are the qualities that make a great clinician, a great entrepreneur / leader?
I mean, I would say, like, just right off the top of my head, like, empathy and emotional intelligence. I remember thinking when I went through grad school, like, if this doesn't work out, like, if I don't decide to become a clinician, I'll probably be successful in any field because I've learned how to relate to people. And I think that that's actually something that's, like, not as easy to learn as some of the more tactical business frameworks. I mean, certainly those are hard too, and it takes its own kind of side of the brain to understand and learn that, especially if it doesn't come naturally to you, which it didn't to me. But I think that what has helped me become a good leader is my interest in the profession, my empathy for my colleagues, et cetera, et cetera. But I would also say that those have been my barriers as well, and if I can get into that a little bit, I think it's like, oftentimes I've struggled to, like, think big enough, because I didn't come into Motivo thinking like, I'm going to build a $1 billion company, a unicorn. I've thought, I just want to help make this easier for other clinicians. And so I have something maybe I'll share about that later, but I think it's just that, you never know, like, what combination you need. And I think that when I look at other great leaders, I'm like, there's a million different things that make a great leader. I know what, like, works for me and the kind of company that I'm growing, but I also have to, like, bring in all the other people that I need that kind of encapsulate, like, what our leadership team needs. Whereas I feel like there might be another CEO that might be a little bit more, like, stern and growth oriented and ruthless. Like nobody's scared of me at Motivo, unfortunately. Like I'm not like putting down like the gauntlet or whatever. But I think that can be a great leader as well. But then maybe they don't have the empathy side, which is really important. They need to bring in somebody to help with that. So I would just say that anybody can probably be a great leader. It's just in knowing what your growth areas are and bringing on people to help in that area.
Yeah, it's great. Nicki, what do you think?
So leave it to somebody trained psychoanalytically to start with self-awareness. I had to plug analysis, but I think that any leader that's able to do the introspection, makes for a great leader. I think that humility and that ability to reflect is something I would put up against probably any other quality. The second would be the ability to listen. I think there's a lot to be said about talking and being articulate, but I think listening's underestimated. And I think if you're trained to listen, wow, it does a lot. And the final thing I would say, and then I'll hand it over to the one and only Jess here, is that as a clinician, my fundamental motivational construct is patience. Right? I am a clinician first. It is about the patient. And that just anchors me in a way that I think makes for quite a quality. Jess, what do you think?
I think you're both absolutely right. I think there are a number of qualities that make great leaders, and it's not always super straightforward what those qualities are. And I would say I completely agree, Nicki, that it's all about the patients. For me, the reason I do this is the impact that I want to make. I want to solve a problem. I want to make it easier for new moms to get mental health support when they need it, affordable, equitable support. And that's what drives me personally. And I think that it is all about the patient. What's difficult is being an academic physician too, like Reena. We're not really trained to think about money. We're not trained to really figure out that balance, right, between patient care and what makes the company money. And so that's been the hardest sort of dissonance for me, figuring that out. But at the end of the day, I think it always comes down to what's best for patient care. And then the other, so impact is like my driving factor. And then the second thing I think is in this space in particular, especially fundraising, if you're a founder or like an early stage company, perseverance.
Yeah.
It is really hard to fundraise right now. Everyone told me there's no way you're going to get funding. I've been told you can't be a mom, a doctor, and a CEO. There's no way, and mostly men. So no offense to all the men in the world, but like that message only came from male investors. And fortunately, I happened to convince really great investor group. I'm actually sitting in their office right now, Point 406 Ventures, to believe in me. And I think that it is possible. You just have to persevere, and you have to believe in what your mission is so deeply that you can't not do it. Like I couldn't not wake up every morning and be passionate about this.
Yeah, thank you all. I'm going to dig in on a couple of points you just made. So I have heard from others, not clinicians, that this point, which I agree with about having a patient-oriented North Star driving your mission and your business is critical. But I also hear from others that the concern that being too patient-focused makes you less able to really think about unit economics, fundraising, how to hire and fire the right people, right? So talk a little bit about that, and how you can keep that North Star forward and hold the need to be mindful about the business realities, because I think non-clinicians think that we're not able to do both things in one.
I'm happy to jump in. So the answer is it's not mutually exclusive, and I think we have to be responsible as a clinician to understand that business acumen and know-how is critical. As a mental health professional, I don't love this field if I'm not respecting the low margins. If I'm not understanding that if I don't have the business diligence one needs, that you'll commit financial suicide. And so it's incumbent on me to take that responsibility. But what I would say to the clinical side is that, you know, when you're a clinician, you're able to make those decisions. Where is it that, you know, quality has to trump quantity of whatever kind? Where is it that quantity has to trump quality? And you can make clinical integrity types of decisions, high quality, understanding and being able to make very informed decisions. But the strategy for anybody listening that is a clinician, or the expectation is you have to understand and know business. It is critical, but I would say, you know, it's not myopic business IQ and it's not mired in EQ. It's got to be both. And you better believe we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
I love that.
Yeah, I think what I would just add to that too is that, you know, I think one of the hardest parts early on in a journey of a startup is that you have to do all of the things as good as you can before you can hire like today I sit here and I'm like, we have a full leadership team. I can focus on the areas that most need me and my expertise because I have other people to deal with the spreadsheets and the marketing and all those other items. It was not that way. You know, Motivo's 6 years old. It was not that way for the first 4 years. You know, it was the sludge of like, I have to try to figure out how to do an Excel document and think through unit economics. And I mean, I think that that's the piece that is really daunting and frightening. I think it is learnable, but to think about the characteristics that make a strong leader, I think particularly that make a strong entrepreneur is like an ability to figure something out. Like I needed to spend more of my time figuring out the stuff that was uncomfortable for me. And I'll tell you, that takes a bit of a toll on your mental health, because I'd rather spend time talking about patient care and clinical supervision models and answering like the quick, easy questions in Slack, like what are the virtual supervision rules for Arizona? I'm like, I know, and it made me feel good to like know those answers. But actually where I needed to spend my time was on the areas where we didn't have anybody looking at our unit economics and our pricing strategy. And I had to do it before I was good at it and before I could afford to hire somebody for it. So I think that's a real challenge in growing a startup, is getting to that place where you can actually afford the talent you need to supplement what you bring to the table.
So there are several questions in the Q&A, which I'm just going to get to because they're good follow-ons to the conversation we're having. And many of them have the same theme, which is, so how did you learn? Just to pull threads from all of these questions, you know, did you get an MBA or any additional degree? Did you have mentors that helped you? How did you address the knowledge gaps that you had, you know, with self-awareness you were able to identify in yourself? And how did you, as one of you came to say it, kind of know business? So all the questions sort of have the same
can start
theme,
with that
which is,
one.
how did you get there? Yeah, go ahead, Jess.
So I can start with that one. So during my medical training, I sort of dabbled a little bit in startups to get to know the space a little bit, but I had a very surface level understanding. During my MPH year, I took classes at Harvard Business School and took some venture capital courses just to understand mostly just the lingo. Honestly, none of that helped. None of that helped. I think what really helped me was that when I started to think about funding, fundraising, and how we were going to make this company stand up and be a sustainable business, I realized, look, I have to figure out how to speak investor language. And the best way for me personally to do it is, and the best way I learn in general is to go out and just do it and mess up and figure out how to do it better. So I actually, and I don't know that this is the playbook that all founders want to take, because it could be risky potentially, but I just went out and started talking to investors, started pitching, started figuring out what it was that they needed and what they wanted. And I didn't even know what unit economics were. I didn't know what LTV was, but I would be asked the question in a meeting, and then I say, okay, I need to figure that out. I'm going to go and figure it out. And through this process of talking to investors, I actually refined our business model, figured out what the business was, like basically how I was going to scale, what the unit economics were. And it was just very helpful for me to get my feet wet and understand what was expected of me by doing it.
But
I don't have an MBA.
Yeah. So I took a different route, and I think the beauty of Jess and Rachel's going to bring this one home. I just know it. Is that you can do it different ways. I think the answer is there's no one path to figuring out business chops. I did go back and get my executive MBA in health sector management and policy. I did it because I felt like I could fight the clinical acumen with anybody. And I wanted to match that with the business acumen as I was running many hospitals and starting to look at big books of behavioral health business. But what I would say, because people often say to me, you usually see maybe a Psy.D. M.B.A. like I am, is an MBA was my decision because it made sense in the hospital operational world. But you can learn, just like Jess was talking, in so many ways in terms of the financial acumen, anything that you feel like you need to bolster or accelerate in terms of your financial knowledge. There are so many incredible mentors I've had and many have that you can surround yourself with. I think you have to have the humility to lean into that needing to be not just a nice to have, but a must have, and do what you need to do. And it doesn't require doing a traditional route like I did. Jess is, speaks for herself in terms of where she's at. And so I think the cool thing is, depending on who you are, it can look and feel differently on what makes sense. Rachel, bring it home.
I will try to. I think that you make a good point of like when and how an MBA might be useful in hospital management. I rarely hear people say that you need an MBA as a startup entrepreneur. I certainly haven't felt the need for one. My undergrad is in Bible, so that's like the title of the Bible. So I've been able to make it somehow. And mostly how I did it was just reading. So I read $1 Million Women by Julia Pemjuler really early on, gave me like a really great kind of overview of like what a startup looks like, and then angel investing. And then I read Venture Deals. So from a fundraising perspective, those really helped me. I went through the Techstars Accelerator program, which was incredibly helpful in terms of like honing the pitch and like telling the story, all of those things. I definitely had a mentor, Mark Goldenson, who he had a mental health startup in the space that sold several years ago. He met with me in the early days regularly. Those are all just people that I tried to surround myself with to learn what I didn't know. And I mean, it wasn't pretty. Like most of it you learn by doing it and sucking at it and like trying again. And, I just definitely took that learner. I was obsessed with my own growth and development. I was like, I did that poorly. I'm going to learn from this and do it like this next time. And, I think that's part of quality that makes a good entrepreneur as well, is just, I think Jess said, resilience, being able to kind of like get back up and try it again. So that's what I would add.
That being said, though, if I could piggyback off of what Rachel said, I would say that it doesn't have to be so difficult and messy at the beginning, which is sort of Reena's passion, is to share knowledge, which is why we're doing this webinar right now, is to share the knowledge so that, we don't have to make some of the early mistakes over and over and over as an entrepreneur, as a group of founders and CEOs helping each other. There are things that we can teach each other and learn to avoid some mistakes. Of course, there's always going to be mistakes. There's always going to be a difficult road ahead as an entrepreneur, but there are some things that we can teach each other and learn from each other and make it a little bit easier.
Yeah. Thank you all. It's, again, the theme of like, there's no one right way keeps, sneaking in there, right? We each have our different paths, and mine was, slightly different than all three of yours, right? I similarly knew nothing, jumping from academia into entrepreneurship, gosh, over a decade ago, but I had a team of really great, smart people, right, that I could tap on, whose shoulders I could tap to ask questions. As I call it, my personal board of directors, right? My mentor team, not one person, but a whole host of people. And I think there's a bit of a fearlessness, right? That you kind of have to take forward. Like, you will not know everything, and that's okay. And you have to be willing to ask. I used to say, I'm not dumb. Like, I have a lot of Harvard degrees. Like, I'm not dumb, but I just don't know that. So that released me from this feeling of, fear and asking, so the first time someone put up a slide in an operations meeting that said COGS, cost of goods sold, I didn't know what that meant. So I was like, can we just pause? We had a dozen people in the room. I'm like, can we just pause? Someone just explain to me what that acronym is, and cost of goods sold. Okay, that makes total sense. Great, keep going, you know. And I think, you know, you have to have a comfort with yourself, right? And self-awareness and a fearlessness to then ask and be willing to learn. And then I had people outside the business too, who I could sort of say, you know, how much equity should I get? What should my salary be? When should I be pushing for the next tranche of equity or options, right? And I think it just, as you pointed out, one of my passions here going forward is really creating that community where we can share learnings back with one another, in order to ease and accelerate the path of other clinician executives to be able to drive clinical innovation. So increasingly, there's a groundswell, right, of people who are doing this. And I think there's a lot of us who are eager to help the next current and next waves of folks, as they're coming up and through this world. So thank you, guys. We've touched on a lot, but I think we got a couple other topics I want to make sure we touch on, and we've got some great questions coming in here. Thank you all. So keep putting your questions in. I'll pull them as we go, because they're weaving in nicely to our conversations. Let's talk a little bit about fundraising. You hinted at it or spoke about it, Jess. You know, as clinicians, there is the female lens. We'll go there. Let's talk about that too. Let's start with like fundraising as a clinician, and some of the perceptions or maybe misperceptions about clinicians running companies, and what your experiences were like raising capital to be able to bring your missions forth, and into reality. Any of you, if you want to comment on what that experience was like and some of the things you bumped up against as you were raising capital.
I'm super curious about Rachel's answer to this question, and Nicki. One thing that I think I was perhaps naive about is that I think when you start a company, when you build a company, you kind of have to decide, like what Rachel was saying, is this going to be $1 billion unicorn? How big is your scope? And how much money do you need to get there? And because the path to achieving your mission is very different depending on how big, you know, how big you envision your company to be and to grow and to scale. And so I think at the beginning I thought, okay, well, I similarly was like, I don't need to build $1 billion company. I will, you know, do it slowly at small scale and grow it slowly, and primarily lean on angel investor funding. And then I tried that and realized along the way that no, I actually do want to solve this problem across the country. I want to build $1 billion company. I want to make the impact at the scale that like I never envisioned before. But it wasn't until sort of testing both sides, you know, you don't have to do one or the other. They're not mutually exclusive, but I sort of went down the angel investment route and then talked to some venture capitalists, and it was a very different conversation, a very different scale. And I, through that process, figured out that I wanted to go the venture route.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, I mean, fundraising was, it's awful.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so hard. We've raised about $16 million over the last few years, and it's not easy, for me at least. You know, pitching was not something that came naturally to me. Telling the big story and the big idea was not something that came naturally to me. So I had to kind of like adjust my thinking, and like, it doesn't matter for me as much that I don't want to build $1 billion company. It matters, like, could this be $1 billion company? And that little shift in the reframe for me is like, I am the steward of Motivo to make sure that we help as many people as possible and get as big as we can responsibly get. So maybe that looks like building it to here and then seeing what someone else wants to do next with it as we grow into another company, you know? So I think that there's always a framework that you have to be thinking if you're going to fundraise of how does this solve this problem for many, many people. And I really liked Leah's question in the chat. So I just wanted to address that in terms of like, you know, is there times that you've had to sacrifice like patient care or clinical care, you know, in order to fundraise? No, for me, no. And I think it really matters investors that you work with. And I think there's a little bit, I see it on LinkedIn a lot. There's this kind of clinician kind of idea that venture capital is evil. Like Motivo exists because of venture capital and the investors that have believed in this idea. I could not have bootstrapped this company on my own. I just don't have the technical knowledge to build a platform without any funding, you know? And so that didn't come with trade-offs for me because I luckily picked investors that ended up making decisions that were the best for the company. And they really supported my decision to make decisions that are the best for the industry as well. I think that the growth at all costs mindset is I hope evolved a little bit past that in recent years of no, especially in healthcare, you have to think about patient quality and care. And I know the investors that are represented for our three companies, Flair and for Nicki and 406 for Jess, I think that it's the same thing there, I would guess, that they are constantly thinking about how are you prioritizing patient care as you're growing the company. So that's what I would add.
Yeah, Nicki, I want to hear your answer in a sec, but I want to just catch on a word that you used, Rachel, which is luckily my investors. And I don't think it's luck at all. I think money's just money, but the people behind the money are very special and unique. And when you fundraise, I think you go find those people that align with your approach, with your mission, and your vision about how you want to run a company and advance it forward, right? I think the investors that you just noted and yours too, Tim at Cox and others, right? Like they're special people, right? That are mission oriented. There are investors that are just investing financially, but I think it doesn't have to be luck. I think you do your diligence on the investors when you're fundraising and ensure that alongside capital come humans that will support you in your approach to growing your company.
Yeah, and I say luck because we didn't have other options. We didn't have term sheets getting thrown at us where I'm like, let me do due diligence on each investor and pick the right one. So for us, it was like the amount of no's that Motivo got in the early days. I mean, so many no's.
Yeah.
So I say luckily because I think I didn't know that I was picking the investors that would end up being the right investors for Motivo. And I really think that I would have just as easily gone a different route if I didn't have any other option and didn't know any better at the time. So yeah, that's why.
Maybe it felt like luck, but I guess the message to the audience is it doesn't have to be luck, right?
Yeah.
There's enough of us now that know the different manner and perspective and approaches of the investors out there, such that you can be more disciplined in making a decision with the right due diligence to pick an investor who aligns with your mission.
Reena, I think that I would love to just I think it's really hard to know who the right investors are.
Yeah.
A first-time founder, clinician, it's so hard to know. What questions do you ask? Like everyone says, oh, you're interviewing your investors just like they're interviewing you. But at the beginning, you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm this tiny fish in this huge sea and everyone's saying no to me. And like, I'm begging people for money and you feel like you're insignificant. And so I think that's an area that we can support each other and teach each other as founders, CEOs, clinician executives. And that's an area that really needs exploration because it's truly about finding the right investors. I also feel very lucky that I found the right investors. But at the beginning, I really had no idea who the right investors were, what questions to ask or how to find that out.
Totally. Nicki, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and Jess, I appreciate what you're saying. It's funny, I'm a former soccer player. I hung up my boots years ago, but I think mental health in particular is about a team-based sport as you've ever seen. And that includes the investors. I have to give a shout out to Flair and Polaris. I also have Blue Cross of Kansas. I've got Fiora Ventures. I've got CHCF and Peter Lynch. And I have to tell you, similar to being stewards of the dollars, you're stewards to your company and your people. And it's what's in the best interest of the company. And there's no more important team, particularly when you're a small engine that could, than your board and those investors or that team of teams. And it's just critical. I mean, I think a lot of things need to be deliberate and purposeful, but I think finding investors where it's not just about capital, you need the capital, obviously early on. You also need the emotional capital. You need to hear things like, you know, being a missionary versus a mercenary is important as the leader of this company. Similar to clinicians are seen as not being the best leaders at times or executives, and that misnomer, I would say investors, there's a lot of misnomers around them not having that mission driven selves that all of us appreciate a lot. And so I think one of the things that was the perception that I very much found very kind was the appreciation of, gosh, Nicki, you ran a lot of hospitals, you've managed a lot of book of business, but you've decided to lean into new care delivery models. You've decided to do mobile modalities. There's a credibility and competence to understanding my lens of the world in mental health and appreciating that that has weight to it. There's a reason I jumped in the deep end here and didn't, you know, do something else. And I think that comes from not just, you know, from the emotional and the intellectual capital, that when you have investors, that I'd put mine up against anybody's standing by me. So, you know, it's really critical. And I think, Jess, to your point, I think going forward, I don't think that's talked about enough, about how do we support each other, really building that. That's a critical, I think, gap.
I have to just give an example and a shout out to Pyle. So Pyle's on this call right now. She's a partner at 406 and is on our board. And the other day I said something to the extent of, well, I don't understand sales and marketing. Like I need this expert to join our team. And she told me, don't discount your clinical experience. And, really reminded me that I sold the first 5 contracts and like somehow convinced people to work with us. And so just having, like, in addition to the money, like Nicki was saying, having a team of people who believe in you and the mission is so critical. Really aligning with the mission of the company. We are so fortunate to have an all-female team at 406. I mean, Liam, of course, we love you. You're wonderful. You're ultimately the man. We, on the ground at 406, it's 3 women and me. And so, and we all just really align on mission. And so it's just so fantastic to work with the right investors.
I love it. Thank you all for your comments. I didn't plan to ask this question, but you just said something about sales and marketing. So I'm just going to go there because it's top of mind. I think I have heard from other clinicians who are like, I don't want to sell. I don't want to be a salesperson. And my response is, well, every time you're trying to get them to take their statin or their aspirin or their beta blocker, I'm obviously a cardiologist, I'm throwing out all the cardiology meds. You're selling. Like everything you do is you're really just trying to change someone's behavior or preach or convince them to do a thing you think is right. What do you guys say about selling and salesmanship? And we've all been in a position where we've had to be the chief preacher, chief evangelist for our companies. What are your thoughts?
I think maybe I would just say that, like, you can just bring your own unique perspective to that, because I think that I would have thought like, oh, I'm not really like a salesperson, but I'm a very relational person. And that make sales, like I don't feel like I'm like out there pounding the pavement, like, please use Motivo. But like, I do build relationships very naturally with people, and that often results in like good sales opportunity. And I often fell into the trap early on of thinking like, I don't bring enough to the table. I need to know how to negotiate and how to say no and how to push back and all of this sort of stuff. And John Stout, who I saw was on the car, he's our chief business officer, and we all know him very well. He's like, don't change yourself, like that, like bring the best parts of you into the sales process. And if like passion sales, if you are passionate about the problem that you're solving, I think that if there's a gap, if there's truly product market fit, like this isn't easy. You have to have product market fit. There has to be enough people who have your need in order for a company to work. It's not all like the you know, there's a lot of people who can be a great leader and their company's not going to work if there's not product market fit. So you have to think about that too. But I think your ability to sell it, if it's sellable, is probably better than you think it is.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. It doesn't feel like selling when it's a thing you love and you
No,
think
I talk
other
about this
people-
all the time. I'm
Right.
like, don't you want to know what I do for a living? I ask people all the time, like on the plane, don't you want to know what I do? They never do.
Oh, you're that person. Oh,
I really am.
Noted.
yeah, I'm putting
Like,
my
no, I don't have kids.
earbuds
Like,
in.
you want to know what I do?
I would,
Go ahead.
sorry, I was just, Reena, to piggyback, I would say you have to be able to sell. You know, and again, I think the theme of today is walking and chewing gum at the same time. You can believe in every type of, you know, high quality integrity or at the ethos of any type of mental health in particular, you know, industry that I'm talking about, but you have to be able to sell. It's to me, again, if I was to say must have in addition to business acumen would be to sell. And you know, doesn't mean you're comfortable on day one, doesn't mean you feel confident. It doesn't mean any of that. You fall, you get back up, you know, you do it your way, to Rachel's point, but you got to do it. I think selling is critical, particularly the early days as the
Yeah,
CEO.
I will just say, or maybe add to your point, which is I think in your leadership role as CEOs, I would agree. I think what we'll come to hear in future virtual roundtables like this is that there are other roles for clinicians that maybe aren't outwardly facing, that maybe don't have the same requirement for being in, you know, a front-facing salesperson, maybe more clinical operations oriented, right? Or product development oriented, for example, or data research, R&D type orientation. So for your leader, you know, head of company CEO roles, I think 100% agree that, just for if there are any clinicians listening in who cringe still, despite our comments, like there are other places where clinicians can live in this world. There are many archetypes, right, of clinician leaders in companies. So
I would add,
yeah,
if
go ahead.
it okay if so I would say I'm not a salesperson either. I think the difference between a salesperson and CEO and founder of a company that you're passionate about is that a salesperson, you can hand them a 10-year-old stinky shoe and they can sell it. They can sell anything. They can make anything sound appealing. That's sort of how I think about it. But for me, if you handed me Rachel's company and I went out and tried to sell it, I would be terrible at it because I don't understand the mission. I mean, of course it's important, but I'm not the DNA of the company. I think the difference is that when you're so passionate about solving a problem and making an impact, it doesn't feel like selling. Going and talking to OB clinics and telling them about the services that we provide doesn't feel like selling to me. It's literally like, this is a no-brainer. You should do this.
Right.
You know, and so I think there's a difference between sales and being a CEO and founder and really, you know, talking about your mission that you feel so deeply about.
Yeah, for sure. There are a few questions and I've just been weaving them in. So I sort of have not stayed to our 45-minute, 15-minute breakdown here, but they've been great as they've been coming in. There are a few that I could use some clarification. So the person who asked about relationship balance of identities, maybe just add a little color on that question. And then the person who asked about, once the gap has been identified, what's the process? Give me some more color there on what you're getting at, and we'll ask the question to the group. Before we run out of time, we got to talk about life and interweaving life and your work life and your love. Well, okay, no, we're not going to talk about love life. Rachel, you're excited to talk about love life, but life and work. And, you know, I hate to use the word balance because I think it's overused and challenging. I think about interweaving life and work and all parts of our being in one. I'll leave that open-ended and I'll let you guys touch on it, you know, in the ways that feel best for you. I think it's a challenge. We all happen to be women also. I think that adds another layer that's unique and different. And so I'm leaving that a bit open-ended for you guys to touch on in ways that, you know, you feel right. How have you navigated interweaving your work and your lives together?
I'll start and just say, you know, to Jessica's point earlier, you know, it doesn't feel like work to me. So it's been a little bit more seamless in the sense that I feel like I'm always working and never working, you know, and I oftentimes run in the evening time, and I see that as part of my job description. I see going to therapy as part of my job description, because when you're the CEO of a company, the company is like in the same way as therapists, that your clients are going to be a reflection of how healthy you are as a clinician. If you're not healthy as a clinician, you're not going to be able to do as much good. And I think that's true for a CEO as well. If they're not healthy, there's going to be some sort of impact on the business. So for me, I just look at my own kind of personal mental health regime as like part of my job description. And, you know, I have the, you know, I don't have children, so that makes it a little bit easier for me. I'm super curious for the two women who do have children, how they manage all of it. But for me, I find what I do to be like a complete joy. There were definitely, it was harder in the beginning. It's like if you've seen the startup growth curve of like the, what's that area called? I'm trying to think of like the trough of sorrow. That's what it's called. The trough of sorrow. After the initial idea launches and you're like, it's happening and I'm pitching it somewhere. And then there's like a trough of sorrow. My trough of sorrow lasted 2 to 3 years of just grind, and it wasn't fun. But then once you start to have that, you know, moment of lift, as Melinda Gates says, it gets a little easier. So there's hope ahead. But I don't know, Jess, Nicki, what would you say?
This is the area where I'm just gonna be honest, is my weakness. Like, I don't have work-life balance. Pretty much never have. I have been a clinician in training for many decades.
100 years.
Many decades. Okay, it feels like many decades. And you know, and then started a company while I was still a clinician. And it's only now in my life that I'm figuring it out through starting FamilyWell. Part of starting FamilyWell for me was also learning about how to have that balance in what's important in my life and how to support mental health for myself and for our employees and other moms out there. So I would say that this is my weakness and I'm still figuring it out, and it's probably going to be a lifelong journey. But I would say that what I don't want to regret later down the line is seeing my kids grow up and be really truly being present for them when I am there. And so that's the piece that I'm working on right now.
Yeah. It's funny, if you took the cameras off and you saw my life in realist form, I'm not sure you would ask me how to manage. Not sure anyone would be calling me for their lifeline here. But I think there's a couple of things. I think time is a thief. And anybody that is a mother, what I learned early on was non-negotiables. That you show up to their, you know, parties and their plays and their soccer practices and their, you know, in my case, water polo and volleyball practices. And you carve out that time knowing that later you might have to put back in, but that it's more of like a jungle gym than it is. I think it was Sheryl Sandberg that was using that in a different reference, but it is to me more like that than balance of any kind. And that, you know, making memories, whatever that looks like, again, could look 100 different ways, but that at the end of the day, you know, taking care of yourself and your company and your family all at different times. There are days where my family is, you know, the company goes to the side. There are days the company is first, and the family is fine and stable. So it's a balancing act, pun intended, and one that is as agile and as, you know, as much as you have to persevere as a CEO is the same skill set, toolbox, whatever, that I feel like I have to have as a parent. And so it's humbling. I think the thing I would say I've learned most about it is I take stock every night of what kind of a parent I am. I take stock every night of what kind of a CEO I am, and to have the empathy for yourselves and to have, you need every last drop if you're going to do anything in entrepreneurship. And I think you can model, and don't underestimate the modeling you do for your kids by working boldly like this. I think we sell ourselves short when we don't hold that.
Yeah, thank you all. I think starting with self-compassion, self-awareness, and self-compassion are really good foundational elements, right? I'll add to, I wrote about this in an essay in my Substack recently. about being present. And I think one of the things, if I had dialed back, I would have wished I had figured out earlier is how to be present in each place where I was needed when I was needed. If at home, be 100% there. If at work, 100% there. With a client, 100% there. And I heard an analogy once, one of the heads of marketing at Coca-Cola who gave a talk on women's leadership development, and she described it as a chest of drawers. I want to imagine like in, like a library card catalog. And like, if you're going to open, you can't open too many at once or the thing will tip over. If you're going to open a few here and then you need to open that one, you got to close a few over here, right? And you just have to be able to kind of navigate that. And to me, that was a really good analogy for sort of being present where you needed to be. We just have a minute or two left, and I'm going to give folks listening in a moment to pick their heads up and to have a breath before they get to their 1 o'clock on the East Coast, 10 o'clock on the West Coast meetings. So I'll just end with, there were so many things we could have gotten to, so many questions you all posed from the audience that we could have gotten to. This is just the first of many conversations. Thank you three for joining me in this virtual roundtable. To folks listening in, this is something near and dear to my heart, highlighting and elevating great clinician leaders, and then helping develop and building up and supporting those that are coming up through the pipeline. So if you have questions, thoughts, ideas for how we do that, we'll have more webinars, we'll have one-on-one stuff, we'll have group events. Please reach out to me, Reena at pandemd.com. We have recorded this and we will make it available if folks want to go back and what did Nicki say there? What did Jess say there? What did Rachel say there? I want to go back and remember that. We will make it available to you. Thank you again and hope everybody has a wonderful day.